Hi everyone and welcome to this video interview. My name is Amanda Brandon and I'm Director of Fleet Services here at the BVRLA. And today I'm joined by Joanne Davis from Auxillias, who is going to talk through some information around the FCA, some ideas of what will be happening next year and what to expect from the FCA in 2021. Jo is as the co-founder and partner at Auxillias, a new legal and compliance firm that was set up to service the consumer asset finance and motor finance industry. Jo works with a number of well-known finance providers, brokers and dealers in the automotive, fleet, asset, consumer finance and leasing industries, as well as many banking institutions and fintechs. Jo deals with a wide range of matters from consumer credit advisory, transactional matters and financial services regulation impacting the finance industry, as well as compliance implementation and support with the FCA handbook and consumer credit sourcebook. She also assists clients and advisors on contentious matters such as asset recoveries, finance litigation and dispute resolution. So welcome, Jo. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Amanda, for having me. Looking forward to this.
Great. So first question was just around senior managers regime. Obviously been around for a while now. Brokers and funders should be getting ready and to go with that. What's the latest with senior managers? What would you be expecting a regulated firm to be doing at the moment with regards to this regime?
Yeah, so we've had some recent developments. There is now a new report, and this is for firms to inform the FCA where they have taken discretionary action against any individuals, and currently this is for non-senior managers for breaches of the conduct rules. And of course you would then be expected to put in a nil return where there has been no breaches resulting from any disciplinary action. The first return that's expected will be certified persons and board directors who are not senior managers, and there will be other staff that obviously can be subject to the conduct rules, but that's been delayed because they're going to give more time for businesses because obviously COVID around staff that are subject to conduct rules. So the form will actually apply to them, but slightly later on. So this first report, so relating, just to be clear, to certified persons and board directors, is due to be submitted by the 2nd of November. And it's really important that, that this form is returned, because any failure to submit by the deadline, it gets charged a late charge fee. And the idea of this form is that you will do this annually. You will put in a report annually and continue that going forward. Where for conduct rule breaches that are by senior managers, there is a Form D or a Form C, and you will apply and submit that via Connect, but you submit those at the time of the breach. So it is really important, and that the FCA are expecting that senior managers and those that are certified and individuals in this regime do undergo a proper review, and if there is going to be a breach or there's some disciplinary action, it gets reported. So but just to remember that the Form D or C, that goes via Connect for the senior managers, and that's at the time of the breach, whereas other staff, it's just going to be one report annually that you have to file. I think some have forgotten that this exists and not necessarily picked it up. They've changed the deadline for firms to assess the fitness and propriety of their certified persons, and that's been delayed from the 9th of December to the 31st of March. And I think that's welcome news, because I think people are still working out what does that discussion look like, and how hard do I need to be, and where is the line, what is the balance. You can certify staff earlier if you're ready. But to remain consistent, the FCA are also consulting on extending the deadline to 31st of March for the date that the conduct rules come into force, which makes sense. The deadline for the submission of information around the directory and which persons are going to be going on the directory, and also the deadline for assessing certified persons as fit and proper, also for the 31st of March. You've got that extra time. There have been quite a few statements that the FCA have stipulated around this as well, and that is that senior managers must ensure that they're trained effectively around how do I conduct these reviews. And the FCA are going to produce further guidance on what their expectations are. There is a really useful document on their website that came with this update around what are positive indicators and what would negative indicators be when you are completing your fitness and proprietary checks, to help you when you are undertaking the reviews. What are good positive indicators for, to sign off the senior manager to still be fit, or a certified person to still be fit and proper, and what would those negative indicators be? And I think that's really useful to integrate that into not only your policies and procedures around this, but to integrate that as part of whatever review you are going to be adopting and integrating into your business by the 31st of March. There is going to be a further update to all of this consultation sometime this month, but I haven't seen it yet. But I think we should expect to see something else around the senior managers regime.
Okay.
They've also put out some really important points as well around oversight. They want senior managers to actively oversee the assessment process and ensure appropriate reporting. And one of the things they've mentioned, that it would be poor practice for senior managers to delegate without demonstrating adequate oversight and reporting of this particular task. They are expecting that senior managers sit on a fitness and proprietary panel and give consideration to marginal cases if they arise. So there should be some sort of panel appointment. And the FCA's guidance reiterates the obligations for firms to undertake regular, thorough and consistent fitness and proprietary assessments. And an individual's competence should be assessed in relation to their specific role. They don't want any rubber stamping approach. It's got to be done properly. And they are expecting that they will incorporate a robust process to identify certified staff on an ongoing basis. So I think, this is something to be taken seriously, but I think actually these extra pointers are really helpful, because it may well be that firms have already devised what the certification fitness and proprietary assessment might look like, but I would now review whatever they've done in line with these new guidance that have come out, and in particular make sure they implement into that review the positive indicators and the negative indicators approach. So that is certainly something that's new there on the senior managers regime.
Okay, interesting. What do you know what the fine is if you are late submitting that report you mentioned at the beginning?
It's only a small fine of £250 for not putting in this. So it's not too bad, but it's more about how they may then see you as a firm in compliance generally with things that they require, that it doesn't look good on you to be late.
No, absolutely. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well, we've got some fact sheets on the senior managers regime if members need those on our website. The senior managers work is now part of the audit programme that CCAS conduct of leasing brokers. So if any leasing brokers have got an audit coming up, CCAS will be asking questions about how leasing brokers are progressing senior managers regime as well.
That's excellent.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if we move on to the commission disclosure rules, obviously probably quite a bit of a hot topic at the moment, coming in at the end of January. So there's commission disclosure rules and the ban on discretionary commission models. Have you got sort of a few maybe top tips or something for how firms prepare for that?
Yeah, so I think now that the FLA have completed their final guidance to support lender firms who have to be in the driving seat for this now, about what potential models are going to be fit for the new world, now that we have firmly removed the DIC upward and downwards type models and the scaled commission models, and that's now all fallen away. And I think now it's all about working with their brokers and their retailers and getting into, discussions around, well, these are the models that we're now going to be looking to adopt. But on all of these models, there could be potential risks. So let's talk about the systems and controls and the data that I'm going to require from you, broker or dealer or supplier, or whatever the case might be, of how you're going to ensure that I get the right data to make sure that there's no unintended consequences from us running these models. I think lenders are very aware that the FCA paper opened with, we are going to come and have a look very soon at the new models that you've implemented, and therefore are making a decision on which of the models are going to work and which of the models are the less risk for us to monitor. And those discussions are now taking place. And I think it's the most important thing for me is which I would advise all of the lenders and the brokers, is that whatever model you are agreeing with, and if you might have a series of different models, you may go for rate for risk, or you might go for just one rate, whatever model you make the decision on, or you might have a discounted model, whatever that might be, is that you work out between you how you're going to go and monitor that to ensure that there are no unintended consequences and that there's no customer detriment, vulnerable customers are protected. And that you document and you evidence it, you write, this is the model we're going with, why we're going with it, why you're considering that it's going to be okay and good outcomes. That whole evidencing piece is so important. Yeah, that is put into place. So don't just implement them and launch them without doing all the documentation and the support and the evidencing, and making sure you've looked at all your conduct risks and ensuring that is all in place. And I think once the models are defined, you can then start working on what are the disclosure statements that need to accompany that model. And of course, the disclosure statement might look different on different models. And therefore, what are lenders driven again to their brokers and dealers? What are their expectations that are going to be they're expecting to see in the early recommendation piece that the brokers are liaising with the customer, that the disclosure piece is compliant then? And then what are they then saying again on the disclosure at the time when they're presenting the pre-contractual explanation and information and getting the customer ready to sign up their finance agreement? Because there's two levels of disclosure. You've got the one at your stage where you're doing all your financial promotions, the recommendations, your discussions with the customer. But again, when you are then looking at you're presenting the agreement. And I think with that, it's just important that there is a discussion with the brokers and dealers about that, because whatever they are saying and representing in that disclosure statement has to be accurate, because it's going to be potentially brokers liable for getting it wrong. If they say it wrong, lenders may be taking a responsibility if it's said incorrectly. And I think there's a skill and a requirement to make sure that that's balanced correctly. For example, you might not want to be putting your broker or your dealer into an advised sale position. That they're recommending and they're expected to recommend necessarily the right product, because that might not necessarily apply to them. Or it may well be that the model isn't about getting the lowest rate for the customer. So don't put them in the position that they're disclosing to say, well, in the model you're saying to the customer, my job is to get you the lowest rate. Because if they don't achieve that, or they can't achieve that, then they put that out into a disclosure statement and it could end up running a risk later. So I think, to me now, the key is getting those two things right. Get your models right, negotiate it correctly, evidencing, and get the wording of the disclosures accurate to the new rules. And that nature, what does it mean? How far do we go? So my advice is to work together on this and collaborate together to get these right.
So advice to brokers is make sure you're in lots of dialogue with your funders at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you could be asked from completely different lenders with some completely different statements. And it might well be that is so unrealistic for you to be able to manage correctly, to be able to comply, that you might want to have a discussion back to say to each of them, well, actually, so far, I have these across my panel. And could I potentially invite you to have a lesser set, because there's so many similarities between the statements that I may struggle to get all of your statements exactly how you want it. Could we just agree that a compliant model for all of you would be this, or have them share, don't have 10 or 20, they may be able to have 5. But I think brokers shouldn't fear going back to lenders to say, I can't work with these. You've given me too many, I'm getting them all from all directions. And that is one of their real concerns, I think, with anything that's new to implement.
And also it doesn't help the consumer at the end of the day, does it? Because the consumer's then, well, what am I reading here? I'm reading the same thing 6 times and it varies a little. How do I know what on earth this means? I didn't even know you.
That's right. And don't go over and above what the regulator's asking you to put in the statement, because then that can be dangerous, because you could be putting more obligations on them than it's necessary.
Yeah.
You know, so they've been very clear of what the early statement needs to contain and what the one leading up to signing up the finance agreement needs to contain from a disclosure perspective. I would probably warn people not to go over and above that.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Really helpful stuff there, Jo. So moving on to forbearance, obviously been such a hot topic this year with COVID. The latest guidance seems to be indicating a bit of a return to normality in terms of forbearance rules and trying to sort of get back to a situation where, I guess, you know, firms can, if they need to, start working down repossessions and that kind of route. Do you have maybe 3 recommendations or something? What should firms be considering at the moment on forbearance?
Yeah, so I mean, my 3 things would be provide tailored support to your customers to reflect their individual circumstances and document that discussion and what is the support that you're giving tailored to their needs. We are now back to a one-size-fits-all or one program or one offer is probably now off the table. It's got to be tailored. And start the support early before they miss the payment, because once they've missed the payment, it's a lot more difficult. And you know, the regulator is wanting the lenders who are working with their customers to be proactive in that, you know, not wait till they default. If there is an expectation that they're going to miss a payment, talk to them early. And I think the requirement that they should have in now is having a shorter and longer term payment option. So you're going to have that discussion with the customer. Is this short term? Is this long term? And how do we support you? And if it's short term, there should be programs to put them on a short term program to get back and fix it, get back to normal. Hopefully, it may not be. And then on the longer term issues, I think that's more of a proactive understanding of what's their income, what's their expenditure, what are the actual issues, and have a solution, have a solution ready and payment options ready that you can tailor to their needs. But more importantly, whatever you agree, it's got to be a sustainable payment plan, because there's a large obligation from the regulator on the lenders that you reach something that's sustainable. And don't push them to an unrealistic plan that you know they're never going to meet. Because if they're not going to meet it and they fail, then actually the duty is perhaps a failing on the lenders not to have got something that's sustainable in the first place. And don't forget, though, that repossessions open again from the 1st of November. So there are always going to be cases where your customer is not going to be able to pay. There's not a short-term or a long-term plan that can be come up with. And you're looking at moving to the repossession situation, but the handling of that, I think, is really, really, really critically important, and the evidencing around making that decision to repossess. And I still think there is a little bit about a last resort for customers that are very willing and coming to the table to try to agree that plan. and brokers, I think they can be very proactive here to get an understanding, because they have relationships with these customers, of course, and usually the customer's going to go straight to the broker, aren't they? Because that's maybe where their trusted relationship is, to get a steer on, well, what shall I do? That the brokers are well aware of what programs their lenders are offering. But they've got to also be careful, because they might not have permissions to do any debt counselling, debt adjusting.
Yeah.
So they've got to be very careful that they make it very clear to the customers that I know this is potentially some areas that are on the table, but don't get into going down the line of
advising. Yeah.
Explain that they have got to go to talk to the lender for that. And whilst I would love to be able to help you, I haven't got the permissions and ability to do it, even if I wanted to. But I think you should speak to the lender about the payment options, and make sure they are referring them to the lender, that they don't get into any of those discussions.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it, from just saying, okay, it's not my problem, but and there is a kind of sweet spot just in the middle where you can say, well, I know this funder is offering this, this and this. I'm not telling you that any one of those is better for you. I'm just saying this is what they're doing. Now go talk to them. And I just feel that middle bit is so, at least then you're sort of offering a bit of empathy, aren't you? And that customer's more likely to come back to you if they get into a situation again than if you've just gone, nothing to do with me, mate, go speak to the funder.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the last thing you want is the customer going to the lender and saying, well, the broker told me I could have this, and they told me I could have this, and I told me I had that. Because if their expectations have already been managed when they come to the lender, and the lender's then saying, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah.
It is really, really difficult to then have a satisfied and happy customer.
Yeah.
That leads to complaints because their expectations weren't managed in the first place.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's not going, this issue of forbearance isn't going to go away. And I think, certainly next 6 to 12 months, we're just going to see such volumes in this area where, we're moving away from the furlough scheme now and, into this other, local lockdowns. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of people for quite some time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you've got a customer that's already had 1 3-month deferral, and then they've already had a second 3-month deferral.
Yeah.
The way that you're going to be having a discussion with the customer now around tailored support is going to be different to the customer that comes in and says hasn't had any yet. They've only just fallen into difficulties. And then as a lender, you might see the way to treat them fairly is that I give them and I grant them what I did to my customers. But it may not be appropriate. And I think that's why the regulator is recognising, which is supportive to them, that it's all about tailored support. That's the key statement here. Give them tailored support. You need to know your customers, what is going on, to able to give them that tailored support, and not to fall down there on that point, because the regulators made it very, very clear that they will come down on any lenders that are not doing this correctly. And it's very, very, very big challenge, but evidencing is key, because that's all you can really do to justify your decisions, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Which kind of neatly leads on to my next question, which is around vulnerable customers. So we saw the FCA consultant guidance, and I think they're now going to bring that in. So there's not going to be any implementation period. So the guidance that we've got as part of this last consultation, you can take pretty much as read, can't you? It's not going to be a huge change. I mean, what would you say to regulated firms with regards to vulnerable customers? What if you haven't, say I've first day on the job and I've got to deal with vulnerable customers, what do I do?
Yeah, and I think this is where we've seen this shift now, where we had definitions of vulnerability that we were utilising as the starter of our policy and our process, and how we were expecting our staff to work with vulnerability. We had some definitions of what vulnerability was, and that would be our trigger, whatever our definitions that we were adopting, to then work with our vulnerable customers. Well, when that's changed so much, where they've said previous guidance, that now you're actually needing, previous guidance is gone, And the new guidance is that you need to consider both actual and potential vulnerability, and that firms must look at the spectrum of risk and be ready and able to respond. It's a whole policy and procedural change in a different way and a different approach to who is a vulnerable customer. It's now about, well, risk, a spectrum of risk, and actual and potential vulnerability. So it makes it a little bit more challenging, and this need now in the new guidance for firms to encourage customers to talk about their needs actively, and promote the support services available. So signposting is really, really key. A dialogue with the customer, let's talk about it. And then that will then allow me to signpost you to where you can get the right level of support. And looking at, you know, what's actual vulnerability, what's potential vulnerability, and drafting your policies and procedures accordingly. And how do you work the spectrum of risk in order to be able to assess your ability to respond accordingly to that customer's vulnerability? And that's what's the biggest difference, and that is a shift change. What I like about this draft guidance, and of course it's not quite there yet in terms of it's final. We haven't had its final guidance, but like you say, it's going to be implemented literally straight away. Is that there is a what they call as a vulnerable customer to-do list. They are guiding on what you should be looking at now. So there's some key things, exercising judgment. So you're going to use your own judgment to consider what each section means to firms and what they should do to ensure that they treat customers fairly. And it's not a tick box exercise anymore. The review of the culture and your policies and procedures to demonstrate how culture, policies and procedures ensure that fair treatment of vulnerable customers. And this has got to be embedded in the whole life cycle, from the product development to the services, to the process and the design, and to all the communication. So vulnerability assessments are constant throughout that customer journey. Deliver staff training, you know, really important that, you know, all these new guidances, they're trained on and they understand what does this mean, and what does this mean to my role? For what if I'm in sales, or am I in operations, or I'm in collections? How, for my role, what is a fair treatment of a vulnerable customer? And I then operate that in my day-to-day working with my customers. Checking your systems and functions. So you've got to set up the systems and processes in a way that support and enable consumers to disclose their needs. It's like inviting me to talk to me. Talk to me about your needs, which is new, because I don't think you would go that far previously to have that talking and signposting to that extent. And you know, evaluating that customer journey, you know, respond to the needs of your customer at all stages of that journey, and learning and improve, so that continuously monitoring and learning what activities and processes are working well, and what needs to be adapted to improve the outcomes for those vulnerable customers. So I personally think it is reviewing the guidance, review your policies and procedures that you've had under the old guidance, and make those amends, and then just deciding on the how and the what and the when, and what are we now changing in each of the divisions working with vulnerable customers day to day.
Yeah, it kind of lends itself really well to sort of a case study training approach, doesn't it? So that you have a couple of examples of where maybe as a firm or as a funder or a broker, you've maybe dealt with a vulnerable customer and a really good outcome, and this is what you did, and you're sort of sharing those within the teams that are working on the, you know, like you say, depending on which area they're working in, but looking at how they can take all the good points from those and possibly some of the bad points as well. Where did this not work? Where did we potentially fail a customer, and how can we make sure this doesn't happen again, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always I like to train on final guidance, because I think in terms of carrying out all the final training. But by then I would expect lenders and brokers to have already got something ready, and it's more about waiting for the final before I press the button and go with it. And, you know, they're not using the final guidance to then start to then look at it then. Yeah. But I think the training on the final guidance is important. But, you know, sometimes people can read these documents and not necessarily will understand, well, how do I actually implement that? And I think the training and support that's needed is the hows for each of these, your staff working in these different areas where they are working with customers, that they need some support on how do I address vulnerable customers in the particular area that I work, and how do I signpost? What would be the right signposting? You know, and look, once the final guidance has come out, I'll probably look to do some more work on that, and we can look at that together if you like, in terms of
that would be great. Definitely.
How we really support them. What does it really mean, and what do I actually have to do?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I think it would be really helpful if we can do something together. And I think it's just going to become so much more important. You know, we talked about forbearance already. I mean, not a week goes by at the moment, does it, without you seeing something else about mental health. And
absolutely,
you know, people are going to struggle through what we're going through at the moment, and that is going to lead to more vulnerable customers. And you might think, oh, well, I'm a small firm, I'm not going to have to deal with a vulnerable firm, but it does affect everyone. So you're going to have to, everyone needs to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we just spoke about the forbearance and, you know, and the relief. Well, I think forbearance is quite complex now. You know, it's quite tricky because, you know, you've got all your conf 6s and 5s and 7 to comply with. You've got the requirements from the FCA that are constantly coming out because of COVID. And you've got this vulnerable customer piece, you know, and you could be granting too much credit to a customer, but you don't know that they're going to get credit from another lender and another lender, or how many. And are you the creditor that's just lent them, that's tipped them over the edge over that period of time because they've been doing too many lends, and then made them vulnerable as a result of you being the last lender in a chain of lends that they've managed to secure.
Which is an important point as well on the forbearance guidance, isn't it? Because now the credit reference agency reporting kicks back in as well, because you made that point. You don't know how many payment holidays that customers had, and that you know, that's the risk to the funder these days. You know, you don't know what situation, because there's been no transparency on these payment holidays with the credit reference agency. As a funder, you don't really know the financial position of that customer.
Absolutely. And I think because of that, because you can't have accurate credit data now, when you're coming to have your discussions with your customer around this whole thing about tailored support, you can't go and look at their credit file to glean that. So you do really need to do a full fact find and get a proper understanding of, is it short term, is it long term, what's the problems, what's the reason, can you get back on track? But you've also got the balance of the depreciation of the car, haven't you? Because the more forbearance plans that you are giving them, the less resaleable value is there in the car. And is there a requirement to be transparent to warn them on that? Probably.
Yeah, depending on the agreement.
Because at the end of the term, you know, you're not going to have the same value. I think that there is a responsibility there as well. And it's thinking of all these things, isn't there?
Yeah.
Make sure you're covering everything. And all of that links back to then potentially the customer being vulnerable.
Yeah, really challenging. So I suppose just one final question for me. And actually, since we've sort of put these questions together, there's been quite a few announcements. I know there's an FCA consultation this week. We've also got an HM Treasury HM Treasury made some announcements about rules changes on default notices, I think, wasn't it? And then there's also another HMT consultation on how they work with the regulator. So quite a lot on the horizon, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, And I think now more than ever, just to give brokers and lenders an horizon scan of this has come up, because sometimes they don't see it or they don't spot it.
Yeah.
And actually, even since we did the session, when we did the session about my horizon scan, it's changed again, hasn't it? Because there's now even more added just so quickly, and they're coming from all different directions. It might not necessarily be from the FCA, as you say, and the default notice changes and everything, and the final rules on that. And what does that mean? Yeah, it might be worth putting some, time into that as well. Just giving, a quick briefing to everybody what all of these little things mean, and watch out for the dates. Again, but there is so much going on.
Okay, well, look, Jo, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me this afternoon.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it, and we'll keep the membership informed and updated as best we can.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.